charged in connection with her son's deadly high school shooting in Oxford, Michigan. You're looking at live pictures right now. This is the first of its kind case in the country. Jennifer Crumbley facing 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter after her son Ethan Crumbley opened fire at his high school in 2021, killing 4 classmates using the gun his parents had bought for him. They have just asked the courtroom to rise. The judge, Cheryl Matthews, back in the court, the jury entering that courtroom about to deliver the verdict. Ethan Crumbley was 15 years old at the time of the shooting. Both Jennifer Crumbley and her husband are accused of ignoring what the prosecutor warning signs that their son needed help. Now, the husband and the father will be tried separately. Let's listen to the court.
Are you the person? I am. Could you please read your verdict?
Individually?
Sure.
Okay. On count 1 of involuntary manslaughter as to Madison Baldwin, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. On count 2 of involuntary manslaughter in regards to Tate Muir, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. On count 3, as to involuntary manslaughter regarding Hannah St. Juliana, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And in count 4 of involuntary manslaughter against Jeff Schilling, we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Thank you for a woman. You can be seated. I'm going to see
An historic moment in this country amid the school shootings we have witnessed as a country. Again, this is the first case in which a parent has been charged and tried in connection with their child's deadly school shooting. You just heard Jennifer Crumbley found guilty on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 count for each of the students killed in that shooting. The judge instructing everyone in the court to remain seated. Let's listen back in.
Jury seat number 11, was that and is that your verdict?
Yes.
Jury seat number 12, was that and is that your verdict?
Yes.
Jury seat number 13, was that and is that your verdict?
Yes.
Jury seat number 14, was that and is that your verdict?
Yes.
Jury seat number 16, was that and is that your verdict? Yes.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We all know that this is one of the hardest things you've ever done. I'm going to ask you to return to the jury room. The 2 remaining alternates are also going to join you, and I'll be with you in a few minutes.
Thank you.
All rise for the jury.
You can hear the judge there speaking with the jury, saying this is one of the most difficult things you will ever do. The jury now leaving that courtroom. That was the polling of the jury, if you will, making sure that each one of them agreed with the verdict that had been read. Again, Jennifer Crumbley, the mother charged in her son's deadly school shooting, right there in the courtroom. You see her next to her lawyer. She's been found guilty on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter in that courtroom. Let's listen to the judge.
April 9th at 9 o'clock is fine. Thank you.
I'm going to ask that everyone remain seated when you're taken out of the courtroom. Right?
All rise. You may be seated.
You can see Jennifer Crumbley cuffed, being led from that courtroom after being found guilty in connection with the school shooting in Michigan. Crumbley had taken the stand in her own defense, visibly nervous at times, breaking out in hives on the stand, telling the jury that her son showed no signs of mental illness. She and her husband were accused of ignoring the warning signs. She told jurors, quote, "I wish he would have killed us instead." Prosecutors during this trial had pointed to Ethan Crumbley's journal, where he wrote that, quote, "My parents don't listen to me, and I have zero help for my mental problems, and it's causing me to shoot up the school." Of course, the jury, in deliberating, they asked the judge 2 questions. One had centered on the burden of proof needed to convict in this case. The second question, both of these questions coming yesterday, the second one about what they can infer after the shooter, the son, did not take the stand during this trial. As we know, the husband will be tried separately weeks from now. The wife found guilty on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. I want to bring in Trevor Ault, who's been reporting on this case. He's live in Michigan. Trevor, where do we go from here?
Well, now we're going to head to the sentencing portion for Jennifer Crumbley, David, and she could be looking at many years here, maximum of 15 years in prison for each of these 4 counts, totaling up to potentially 60 years in prison. As now this second trial for her husband, James Crumbley, is looming, and now that they've had this guilty verdict, that's certainly possibly not going to bode for him once he gets to the trial. But I can tell you this, David, this was not a verdict that this jury reached lightly. This took more than 11 hours of deliberation. They worked all through the day yesterday after failing to reach a verdict, came back at 9, began deliberating right away once again, worked all the way through lunch before coming to this conclusion. And now we aren't going to get any immediate clarity as to what swayed them because they remain under gag order with that second trial for James Crumbley waiting in the balance to begin next month. Certainly, though, those key moments were from Jennifer Crumbley on the stand. While she denied that culpability, said she did everything she could, she still said, looking back, she wouldn't do anything differently. And that is in the face of a number of red flags that the prosecution laid out. The buying the weapon for their son, which he used in the shooting, laughing off when he was caught the day before shooting, looking up ammunition in class. Jennifer Crumbley texted him, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught." And of course, the morning of the shooting, when both parents were called in because their son had been caught with a disturbing drawing on his math homework that had that gun. It had a person shot. He wrote "blood everywhere" and "the thoughts won't stop, help me." The parents declined to take him home. They left when Jennifer Crumbley testified she did not have to return to work. And less than 2 hours later, that shooting happened and their son killed 4 of his classmates. And now this jury has determined that Jennifer Crumbley is responsible for those 4 students' deaths, Dave.
Stay with us here, Trevor. Another question for you. In the meantime, Trevor points out an extraordinary part of this case, which was the parents had been brought to the school over concerns over their son, actually met at the school, were showed some of those concerns, some of the writings from their son. You heard Trevor allude to that. They then left the school and allowed their son to stay at school, and it was just within a matter of hours that he pulled the gun from that bag. They didn't mention that they had bought their son a gun, or perhaps that the locker or the bag or any of his belongings should be checked. And of course, we know the deadly school shooting then playing out just a couple of hours after that meeting with the parents. Trevor, I wanted to ask you about the jury too, because this was also interesting. Several of these jurors, parents, also gun owners in that jury. And as you pointed out, they did not take these deliberations lightly.
No, absolutely not, David. And it was very clear during the jury selection process. I mean, we're in an area of Michigan. This isn't Pontiac. We're about 45 minutes north of Detroit or so. This is an area where there is a pretty heavy gun culture. It is part of a lot of people's lives, and that's the case for a lot of members of the jury. A lot of these people have grown up around weapons. A lot of them have weapons themselves. A lot of them, their parents had weapons, but they would frequently lock them up. And that was clearly key here, not necessarily the fact that Crumbleys had weapons themselves, or that even that they had bought a weapon to take their teenage son to use at the shooting range. But gun safety is a key issue, and it will be a key issue in James Crumbley's trial too. An investigator testified on the stand in this trial, David, that not only did they fail to secure the weapon that the shooter then took to school and used to kill his other classmates, but in the wake of the shooting, when investigators showed up at the Crumbleys' household, they found 2 other weapons inside the house in a gun safe, but the code to the safe was 000. And you could hear the investigator when relaying that information. It pretty heavily implies that this family did not take gun safety all to the degree that they needed to, with the 15-year-old in their house, and a 15-year-old who they likely should have been aware had deteriorating signs of his mental health here. So the fact that they've been able to reach this conclusion, David, that Jennifer Crumbley is guilty, it means the prosecution satisfied one of 2 possibilities. One is the fact that they failed to secure that gun is enough to find her responsible for those murders, or also, under Michigan law, that she failed to provide what's known as ordinary care by not detecting those signs that her son's mental health was failing, not giving him the help that he needed, and thus she is responsible for the fact that he went and killed his classmates.
Trevor, who's been covering this case for us, Trevor, thank you for laying that out for us. Again, you're watching live coverage. This is a historic moment because we have never seen a case like this before. A parent held accountable in their child's deadly school shooting rampage. In this case, Jennifer Crumbley, the first parent ever to be tried. The husband will be tried next and separately. She has been found guilty just moments ago. 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 4 counts for each of the children who lost their lives that day. One more question before we go, and this goes to our legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. And Brian, just the historic nature of this case, and as Trevor points out there, that it wasn't necessarily the gun itself, but the safety or lack thereof when it came to handling weapons in the home, and also the many warning signs that the prosecution laid out for that jury, saying they were ignored by these parents.
Yes, David, it was both of those. So what we're looking at here is the jury ultimately decided that the prosecution did prove their case, that the multiple red flags that were presented to Jennifer Crumbley and the fact that she had provided the gun, even though the husband purchased it, but she was the last one to go shooting with the shooter, and that it was in an unsecure location that he was able to kill others, created that foreseeability and the causation that under Michigan law, Jennifer Crumbley should have known better. But it's historic in the sense that it's on the path to precedence. I think for the defense, I would ultimately assume that they were going to appeal this case. And in Michigan, you have a right to the Court of Appeals, and then potentially this could go all the way to the Supreme Court of Michigan, and maybe even further. We'll have to watch this case as it continues.
So likely an appeal coming. In the meantime, though, you hint at the precedent, the nature of this case, the historic nature of the case moving forward. We know what we're dealing with as a country when it comes to deadly school shootings, and now as we move forward, there will be increased scrutiny on parents of student shooters, and I hate to say that there'll be other shootings, but we know what we have witnessed here as a country, and the parents' responsibility to look for warning signs and to make sure that weapons are locked up and protected inside the home.
Absolutely. Cases are a number of issues. They affect both the person who commits the crime, but also the society as a whole. I think as parents going forward, we're going to start looking, or we're going to start looking at what our children are saying to us, what they're doing, checking for these red flags. But not only in that, in conjunction, making sure they do not have the weapons to commit these mass shootings that we've seen so often in this country. In the legal world, we call this a bright line rule, that if we are similar to that of the defendant, where these red flags pop up, the school announces those red flags, we see them and we are aware of them, but we're also aware of the danger that may be present from access to a weapon or a lack of protection or ordinary care that garners or gives that person access to that weapon. We now understand what the bright line rule is as to criminality and potential liability in the face of a mass shooting.
Brian Buckmeyer, our ABC News legal contributor. Brian, our thanks to you and Trevor all in Michigan. Again, the breaking news at this hour, Jennifer Crumbley, the mother found guilty 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter in connection with that deadly school shooting in Oxford, Michigan. Her husband will be tried in the weeks to come. An appeal in this case, of course, also likely. Our coverage will continue. ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and I'll be back with the entire team a little later today for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir.